Mind no picking. Enemy is dead ahead. Migi no teki. Enemy to the right. Idari no teki. Enemy to the left. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Armouries and the Oriental and Self-Defence Galleries. My name's Keith, if you've never met me before. My job's to bring things to life for you. So what I just showed you were 3 kata, or sword practice forms from a Japanese martial art called Batto-jutsu. And Batto was a samurai art. A samurai were the medieval warrior knights of Japan, and Batto was the way they trained themselves to draw their wickedly sharp swords from their scabbards and slice their opponents in what appeared to be a single fast motion, but which was and is 2 very separate motions, and we'll come back to why that's important in a couple of minutes. Now, it's not as easy to think to draw a sword like this from its scabbard safely, because this is a katana, the best known of all the Japanese battle swords. And it's a sword that's completely blunt on its back edge. No danger there at all. But this cutting edge is so sharp that it can take off an arm, a leg, or a head, if the person swinging it knows what they're doing. This saya, or wooden scabbard, is made of a flimsy wood, and that means if all you do is grab hold of the scabbard, grab hold of the sword, and try and pull the one from the other, and at any point that cutting edge comes into contact with the wood, it will slice right through the wood like a knife through butter, and right through your left hand as well. So it's very, very important that you understand some basic principles about how to draw and swing and put away your weapon. How do you learn those tricks? Well, you learn by studying waza. And waza are individual techniques. When you stick a whole series of waza together, that makes up a kata. So what I propose to do over the next few minutes is break down the first of the kata that I showed you, which is called mai no teki, into its component waza. So in Japanese, mai means right in front of you, and teki is the Japanese word for enemy. So we're saying the enemy is coming at us head on. And the 4 waza we're going to look at are nuketsuki, which is the initial draw and slice. Then kiriroshi, a finishing technique if the first cut doesn't work. Then we've got shiburi, a way of cleaning the blade. And finally, noto, the technique for putting the sword back in the scabbard. Now when you are going to carry out a kata, the first thing that you're always taught to do is to start from a completely relaxed position, mentally and physically. Now you wouldn't do this in a real fight, obviously, but the point is to try and teach you not to panic in a real fight, to try and start a fight from a fairly neutral mental and physical standpoint. That way you won't get railroaded by your opponent. So what you do is relax, imagine you see your enemy coming at you, and the first thing that happens is your left hand comes up to grasp the sword and the scabbard. The scabbard with these 4 fingers and the sword with the thumb curled over the top of the guard. And this is a very, very important position for a samurai warrior, because it's the position he would carry his sword in when he wasn't absolutely sure that he was safe. So I'm sure you're a lovely audience. You probably won't be surprised to hear we get some real nutters in this place sometimes, especially when they hear they can get hold of swords and guns, you know. So you have to be a bit careful. So if I was walking around, getting a bit close to you now, chatting away, and this nearly happened to me a while back, and someone suddenly leaps up and says, "Come on, can you give us a look at your sword?" If my thumb's over the top of the guard, they can't pull the sword out of the scabbard, no matter how hard they pull. And they can't pull the sword and the scabbard out of my sash. So that's why it's a very, very important starting position for any technique. But once we've established ourselves in this position, we imagine that the enemy is bearing down upon us. We're about to make our draw and cut. Several things happen in quick succession. The first is that your right leg slides forward to close the distance with your opponent. Japanese swordsmanship is almost exclusively about moving into the attack, about smothering your opponent and dispatching. At the same time, your left hand puts a bit of downward pressure on the sword to feed it into the upcoming right hand. So when you put all those three together, you get this movement. And the other thing that happens at the end of this movement is your thumb slips off the guard and winds up in a position slightly to the right behind it. This also is a very important position because the katana is designed to stay jammed in the scabbard. There's actually a brass collar called a habaki just above the guard here, which ensures it stays stuck in place. If I lean over, the sword doesn't fall out. If I'm a dumb samurai and I trip, the sword doesn't go flying across the room or the street. But what sometimes happens is that the sword gets really tightly jammed in the scabbard. And that means if you were approaching your opponent, trying to smother them and make the first attack, and as you step forward, you simply grasp the scabbard, and the hand will then pulled, and it didn't come out. And your opponent would cheerfully step in, and boom, that would be the end of you. So the point of having our thumb here is we're going to begin the draw by putting a tiny bit of pressure just to free the sword from the scabbard. So, now the draw and the cut happen. And I said earlier, it appears to be one movement, and it's actually two separate movements, and it is, and here's why. When you're taught to draw a Japanese sword, most teachers will teach it by telling you to think about pushing the sword forwards and keeping the back of the blade glued to the back of the scabbard. There's no chance of that blade coming up, hitting the top of the scabbard or the side and cutting through. Now, the point at which you've pushed as far as you can and you can't push any further, then you pull the scabbard back. And at some point, the one will leave the other, and either just before it does, depending on the school, or just after, is when you begin the attack. So as you can imagine, if you're thinking only about the attack, and you are pushing the sword forward in one plane, but you then forget what you're doing with your left hand, and you yank the scabbard back in a different plane, once again, the blade stands a chance of gliding against the scabbard, and you'll cut the scabbard and cut your hand. So you always have to think of two separate actions. Push it first, then pull it, and make it cut. So, let's assume we've done that. What have we done with our first cut? Well, possibly we've beaten our opponent's weapon aside. Great, open them up for an attack. Or we may have cut their sword arm. Or if their sword arm's high in the air, we may have cut them across the body. Or finally, we may have missed. Now, if we miss, and we allow the weight of the sword to carry our arm out of line, once again our opponent steps in, boom, he controls this space, he cuts us down. So what we need to do is break the end of the attack thus. So the point and the bottom portion of the blade are still threatening the opponent. Thus, we are still controlling the space in front of us. And hopefully, even if we don't strike them, we stop them short and we get them on the retreat. All of that's one was. That's Nukitsuki, all of that. Then it gets a bit easier, sort of. So after this then, because we control this space, we can step into it. So we step into it with our left leg, then our right leg. As our right leg comes forward, we're swinging the sword round our head and making the second attack. And hopefully the second attack finishes the job, slices the opponent, drops them at our feet. Immediately, we come into the mid-level guard of Chudan. So there are various frontal guards. Jodan is up here, Chudan is here, Seigan is down here. Chudan is the most appropriate because although we may think this character isn't any more danger to us, he may have friends around who might want to join in the fight. And from the Chudan position, we can defend ourselves or attack to the right, to the left, behind us, if we sense there's danger there. And if this character does start to twitch, it's a small matter to make absolutely sure that we finished him off. So Chudan is best. But let's assume that in Kiryorosh, our second waza, our finishing cut, he's over and done. And there's no more danger. So we might want to put the sword away. But now we have a completely different problem. Our sword blade has just struck this poor devil once, maybe twice, maybe even 3 times. And it's all covered in what I will euphemistically call raspberry jam. And if we don't remove the raspberry jam from the sword and we shove it back in the scabbard, it's going to make the sword stick in the scabbard. If we're attacked 100 yards down the road, we won't be able to make another fancy fast draw. So we need to clean it. And so our third waza comes into play. Our third waza is called chiburi, which means almost literally life essence flicking in Japanese. So it's done very differently in different schools. In the school I've studied, it's dead simple. It's a snap to the right with your right arm. Thus, luckily there's nobody sitting there, because otherwise they get a little bit blood in the guts of them. That done, I still wouldn't put the sword back in the scabbard, because it would still be mucky. So what I would do in reality is I would take out a cloth or some absorbent paper, and I would clean that blade thoroughly, or as thoroughly as I could. And then I might put it away. So, chiburi, final waza, noto, putting away the sword. So, we talked about the sharp edge. You probably worked out for yourselves. It has a pin sharp point. Do you really want to put this sword away by going stick it in your hand sooner or later? You really will. And what about all those other people who might be ready to come in and attack us that we talked about earlier? They might still be undercover. The minute I start doing this and looking down, they've got their opportunity. Boom, I'm dead again. So what I need to do, for all sorts of reasons, is to put the sword away without looking down. Which sounds terrifying, but we drew it without looking down, so why shouldn't we put it away without looking down, as long as we observe some simple safety precautions? And once again, the main safety precaution is the back of the blade. That can't hurt. So what we're going to do now for chiburi is grab hold of the scabbard. But this time, only with these 3 fingers, because the thumb and the forefinger are now going to form a cushion and a channel to run the sword through our fingers until we can drop it in the scabbard. So from here, grasp the scabbard, pull it into a position that your instinct tells you is correct for you, flip the sword onto its back, and go to lay it on your hand. And just as you lay it on your hand, do the opposite of what we did when we attacked. So when we attacked, it was push and pull. As you put the sword away, it's pull and then push until the point drops neatly into the scabbard. Once it is in the scabbard, if you're all lined up correctly, you should be able to slide the one towards the other until they more or less meet. You usually give yourself just a moment or two with part of the blade showing, so it will be very easy for you to make another draw if you get attacked in this final moment. Assuming you think you're completely safe, you can then close it off that last portion, re-engage the habaki seal, give the sword a little salute with your right hand. As you're doing that, you bring your left foot up, then you relax a little, and keeping your eyes usually on your opponent, take a couple of steps back, and then the rest of the steps looking around you to make sure everything's all right. So, when you put that together, you get Nukitsuki, moving into Kiryorosh, Chudan, Chiburi, Noto, close off, salute, 2 steps back looking down, rest of the steps looking around. Now, in terms of what you're doing combat-wise, that's dead simple. You whip the sword out, strike, strike, put the sword away. As you get more expert, then the katas become ever more complex, maybe 40, 50 moves. Ducks, dives, cuts, thrusts, jumps, all sorts of stuff. But actually, at the end of the day, this simple kata is the most complex thing you'll ever learn, because it defines your relationship with your sword. If you don't establish that relationship, by the time you finish training in this kata, you're going to hurt yourself one of these days. You simply are. So what I'm going to finish off with is, there's 8 kata altogether in the system that I studied. So I've shown you 3 of them. Maino teki, which we've just broken down. Migi you saw when you're attacked from the right. And Hidari when you're attacked from the left. So if we've been attacked from the front, left and right, where's the next attack coming from? Back. And that, in Japanese, is ushiro no teki. Zenmen no teki. More than one enemy coming at you from the front. Ushiro, mai. Migi, Hidari, Shomen. And finally, Suimono-giri, which is about test kata. So in Japanese swordsmanship, you start off with single-person kata, like I've shown you this afternoon. Then you move on to two-person kata, where you practice with a partner, usually with wooden swords, but sometimes with metal ones. And you rehearse kata, pre-arranged moves, but you cut the safety margins down to the absolute minimum. And that teaches you timing and distance and coordination. And then finally, they give you a razor-sharp sword and you get to do some test cutting. Not on your fight partner in this day and age. So what we do these days is we get bamboo mats, like little beach mats. You roll them up really tightly, you tie them off, you soak them for a few hours in water, then you drain them for a little bit, and you stick them on a cutting stand. And what you wind up with is an expanded, slightly damp, really tough target that they say represents the resistance of a human limb. And when you get a bit better at it, you can stick a bit of doweling down there for the bone as well. And after that, you practice cutting until you can make lovely, clean cuts, completely flat surfaces when you make your cut. Now, I'm not too bad at that, but when you get really good, what you do is get maybe half a dozen mats, and you put them in a U-shaped holder, so they look like the wall of a log cabin. And then, with a single cut, you try and go right through from the top mat to the bottom. That's a real test of technique and focus and the right use of your strength. And I keep telling myself that one of these days I'm going to have the courage to try it. So, sumo no gi. Everybody, thank you very much. Now, as ever, I'll be around for a few minutes now. If you want to come up, ask questions, or have a hold of the sword. You can hold the sword, though. Very strict safety protocol. Keep it pointed up in the air, where it's safe. Make sure it stays in your eye line. If you turn around and talk to somebody or have a photograph taken, don't walk away from me with a sword in your hand. And even if you are a martial artist who's an acknowledged master of the Japanese sword, and you think that was the lousiest demonstration you've ever seen, don't grab this and show me how it should be done. Otherwise, I have to go and ask for somebody to come and sort things out. I'd rather not do that. Otherwise, hope you're having a splendid day. Enjoy the remainder of it. Thanks for stopping by.